When we think of Rome, we often imagine red legions and their famous battalions, a large senate filled with men in white togas, or the truly incredible scale of the Roman Empire at its peak. Only a few of you may think of the Byzantine Empire, the only true successor to the grandeur that was Rome, to the extent that many claim that the Roman Empire never truly fell until 1453. But though Byzantium was the successor to Rome, it only held on to the entirety of Italy for a few years in the 6th century, first losing significant territory to the Lombards, and then failing to keep control over what would become the Papal States. The Byzantines would eventually be relegated to minimal control over the south, until eventually being kicked out entirely around the year 1100. But what if this wasn't the case? What if the successor to Rome actually kept control of Rome? What if Byzantium never lost control over Italy? Firstly, to prevent Italy from falling, we need to understand what led to Italy falling in the first place. The main nail in the coffin of Byzantine influence over Italy was the invasion of the Lombards in 568, conquering much of the north and establishing two other kingdoms further south, leaving the area around Rome vulnerable. It was the raids from these Lombard kingdoms which eventually led the Pope to call for help from the kingdom of the Franks, who upon assisting the Pope helped to establish a direct papal kingdom, further loosening Byzantine control over the peninsula. Finally, in the south, rebellions and invasions by the Muslim powers eventually eroded control over South Italy, until in 1091 when the entire south was unified under the Normans, ending Byzantine influence in the peninsula. To prevent this loss of control, it's vital to maintain Byzantine control over northern Italy by repelling the Lombards, which significantly weakened Byzantine control over the entire peninsula and led to the rise of the Franks in the region. So we will have the Byzantines keep secure control over the northern Italian border, and take immediate action to counter any migrations into their lands. The Lombards, who are now unable to go into the Italian peninsula, would likely move to Bavaria instead. This change in migration has a serious effect on the Lombards themselves, as in our timeline they were thoroughly Latinized and faded away as a unique culture group after migrating to Italy. With them no longer migrating to a heavily Latin-focused area, they may remain as their own people group with a separate culture, though it would still likely be highly influenced by Latin and Germanic culture due to trade and conquest. This one small change has massive repercussions for the future of Europe in all areas, including religion, culture, politics, and even technology and art. Starting with the religious significance, the Byzantines maintaining control over Italy means that Byzantine emperors keep control over Rome, and thus the Pope. Before the establishment of an independent papal kingdom, Byzantine emperors had extremely large amounts of power over the entire papal establishment, with the ability to influence which popes were chosen and what policies these popes implemented. Though some popes resisted, many were subject to Byzantine demands, and in this timeline this treatment would continue. Influences from the Greek Orthodox clergy and the Byzantine emperors would cause the Pope to eventually become a paragon of Eastern Christian ideals, instead of Western ones, and Western ideas of Christianity within Italy would eventually be extinguished. This isn't to say that Christianity is united, however, as many of the Western Latinized nations would still hold the same differences to the East as in our timeline, though now the religious default will be more aligned with Eastern beliefs. A formal split in the faith may still occur, but I'll get into that later. The security of the papacy immediately affects the kingdom of the Franks most of all, which is now under the control of Pippin I, who now suffers from an increased instability due to lack of papal support for his regime, which was earned after Pippin saved Rome from a Lombard raid. The increased instability follows Pippin's heir, Charlemagne, who would be forced to deal with insurrections and other claimants to the throne far more than our timeline. Because of this, after Charlemagne's goals to conquer the Saxons failed to produce any significant results, Charlemagne may take advantage of a weakened Byzantines, who would still have to contend with an Avar Khaganate and the Sassanids. Charlemagne would attack northern Italy to force a concession from the Pope, declaring Charlemagne as the legitimate ruler of the Franks. Due to the lack of focus for Italian territory due to the relative power of the Byzantines, which would dissuade them from conflict early on, Charlemagne's conquests may focus on subduing Germania, managing to annex far more territory, though the Franks would still have less overall territory than in our timeline. After securing control over Germania and beating back the Muslims, Charlemagne may then feel confident enough to declare a war with Byzantium, which would be struggling with threats to the east and north, and may even be struggling with a succession crisis, leading to the Carolingians taking over much of North Italy after a short war with the Byzantines. This slightly different shape of the Carolingian Empire has more effect than you might think, as in our timeline the Carolingians managed to deal a crushing blow to the nearby Avar Khaganate, which at the time dominated most of the Balkans. This strike almost entirely collapsed the Avars, and led to the rise of the First Bulgarian Empire. In this timeline, however, the Avars remain as a state for far longer, perhaps around 200 years longer than in our timeline, allowing for the Avar people to gain a more solidified population in the Danubian basin, meaning when the Magyars arrive in the 9th century, a relatively significant Avar population may remain, giving Europe a population of Turkic-speaking people descending all the way from Manchuria. The Avar domination over the Balkans also allowed for significant Slavic migrations into the region, the populations of which would eventually come to form nations such as Bulgaria, Serbia, and Croatia. The Avars' continued survival may prompt even more Slavic influences in the Balkan, with the lingua franca of the empire switching to Proto-Slavic even in our timeline, potentially leading to more Greek and Bulgarian Slavic populations, and even the development of a Slavic Romania. As mentioned previously, the Avars' collapse allowed for the First Bulgarian Empire to spring into relevance. The lack of a sudden collapse means that the Bulgarian Empire is forced to slowly chip away at territories from the Avars, limiting their power, which could also mean that the Bulgarian advances into Byzantium, at least early on, may never occur, due to Bulgarian kings not feeling that Bulgaria could stand up to the empire. Though the Avars would eventually fall and the Bulgarians would eventually gain around the same territories in our timeline, the Avars surviving for an extra 2 centuries or so would significantly change the ethnic makeup of the Balkans. Speaking of Byzantium, the addition of Italy among its territories doesn't help Byzantium that much in terms of broader territorial changes, as the Sassanids were a serious threat that the resources from Italy couldn't offset. Additionally, the periods from around 700s until the 900s would be a time of political instability within Byzantium, just as it was in our timeline, though this is less certain due to it being impossible to tell what would have happened differently with certain emperors due to this change. The Byzantines, though, would still manage to recover from these invasions from Bulgaria and Persia and begin to rebound around the year 1000. Sorry to interrupt the video, but since I hit 1k subscribers, I'm contractually obligated to do that YouTuber thing now. Did you know that over 80% of my viewers are unsubscribed? To keep up to date with all the crazy videos I have planned, please make sure to subscribe. Also, PS, I have a Discord now. The link to it should be in the description of this video, so if you want to check that out, it'd be greatly appreciated. Back to your regularly scheduled programming. After the death of Charlemagne, the empire would still split in 3 around the same lines. Western Europe would look fairly similar to our timeline. However, since the Pope never crowned Charlemagne as the successor to Rome, Eastern Francia can't form the Holy Roman Empire, so it would have to find a new identity for itself independent from its Western brother. The kingdom would likely center around the Kingdom of Germany, being known as something similar to the Kingdom of the Teutons. This German kingdom would still have the same elective monarchy as the HRE, which would be important after it invaded the Italian kingdoms to its south. The duchies within Italy would not be seen as equal as the northern territories, and this, coupled with greater overall focus on the Germanic people, would lead to constant Italian revolts. These Italian revolts would culminate in the 1020s as a major revolt pleads for Byzantium to help, and having just secured much of its former territories, would join in a war against the Germans. Due to the logistical struggles of leading an army through the Alps and the more consolidated and centralized forces of the Byzantine army, the Germans would eventually be defeated, being forced to cede back North Italy to Byzantium. I predict that this would be the moment when Christianity splits, as an unstable king of Germany would attempt to establish an anti-pope during the war to claim the legitimacy of his right to rule Italy, and to oppose the current pope's connection to Eastern traditions. This would culminate in the religion officially splitting, as the German king would desperately try to keep his anti-pope to legitimize his own reign, eventually dividing Christianity between the East and the West. This new Western pope will be under the direct control of the German king, similarly to the situation with the Eastern pope. But this means that the lack of power balance between the emperor and the pope that happened in our timeline avoids the investiture controversy, which led to further individual autonomy and conflicts between minor landowners, which led to a fragmentation of the empire. Instead, the empire is now much more unified, especially in regards to religion. These changes we have made also likely remove the interregnum that occurred in our timeline, which leads to even further fragmentation and autonomy of landowners. All of this combined culminates in Germany, just like England and France, forming a centralized kingdom, though granted much later than the other two, likely centralizing around the late 1300s. Kaiser boos rejoiced. And now finally we talk about the Byzantines themselves. Through the 9th to the 12th century, Roman knowledge would have had continuous and significant contact with Italy, which is what led to the Renaissance in our timeline. Though probably significantly less sudden, a renaissance would form throughout the Byzantine Empire centuries earlier, leading to many inventions and painting techniques being potentially radically different to our timeline, especially since the role of the Pope and Eastern religious ideology would have significantly more impact on these developments. Italy, in a way, would slowly become more similar to Anatolia, in that significant Greek populations would be present throughout, interacting and even merging with the Latin populace. Like the rest of the Byzantine Empire, the lingua franca would be Greek, potentially even creating a sister language which includes elements of both Vulgar Latin and Greek. In the late 11th century, the Seljuk Turks would expand significantly into Anatolia, and due to the threat the Seljuks posed to the empire, the Byzantines would declare a holy war against them, almost identically to the First Crusade of our timeline. Though this crusade would be markedly less popular across Western Europe as a whole, as it would have been called by another sect, religious fervor would still allow for a sizable crusader force to assemble. Due to being headed by the Byzantines and having a smaller force leading to more cooperation, the crusade would focus far more on Anatolia, the original goal of the First Crusade in our timeline. Byzantium would manage to exit this crusade with regaining significant Anatolian territory. From this point on, several more crusades would be called, this time on the Holy Land. These crusades would likely not lead to any significant changes in the overall power balance of the region, and so I won't cover them. There are two significant differences caused by these alternate crusades, however: the lack of a fourth crusade collapsing Byzantium, leading to the Byzantines surviving as a major power for longer, and the lack of a Teutonic Order which would eventually form Prussia. Though the Byzantines are significantly more powerful and stable in this timeline, they're still likely to fall from grace, though are unlikely to outright collapse. The Byzantine territories in Italy are likely to be the first to fall. With the Norman invasion of Sicily being less successful initially, it would take advantage of the weakening Byzantium to conquer the rest of Sicily. The north would also likely split from the Byzantines, due to differences in culture from French and German influences, as well as a more Latin populace due to less Greek migrations into the area. Throughout the 1300s, the Byzantines would slowly be weakened, with competing states, separatist movements, and succession crises rocking the nation. One good thing for the Byzantines, though, is that due to greater control over Anatolia, the Ottomans can never form as a state in the area, leading to them disappearing from this timeline. This is what Europe looks like in the late 1300s of this alternate timeline, with a more centralized German kingdom, two major kingdoms in the north and south of Italy, a more fragmented Anatolia, a more ethnically diverse Balkans, and a rapidly declining Byzantine Empire. But that's all for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this video. I want to thank all of you for helping me get to 1,000 subscribers. This video topic was chosen by my viewers for this special milestone, but I may have lied. Because over the following weeks I'll post the 2 runner-up scenarios as well. What if Russia won the Great Game, followed with a History 2 video, then what if Denmark stayed an empire. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to see more crazy videos. Comment down below any suggestions you have for any future video topics. On screen now is a video which YouTube thinks you'll like. Stay crazy!